I saw the truth of Islam during my ND, and it changed my life. But when I saw who was waiting for me on the other side, the clock showed 5:30 a.m. when my alarm went off on that fateful day. As always, I prepared for the first prayer of the day, but something was different. The emptiness I had been feeling for months seemed heavier that morning. "Ibrahim, you'll be late for the meeting," shouted my wife Amira from downstairs. She was right. My financial consulting firm was about to close the biggest contract in our history, and I barely had time to breathe, let alone truly connect with Allah. "Coming down, Habibis," I replied, quickly adjusting my navy blue tie. At the office, my secretary Sarah greeted me with her usual efficiency. "Mr. Malik, the board is waiting in the conference room." Mr. Thompson from Goldman Sachs arrived early. I smiled mechanically, but inside I felt that familiar feeling of emptiness. Here I was, Ibrahim Malik, 45 years old, owner of one of Chicago's most promising financial consulting firms, respected in the local Muslim community, but feeling spiritually bankrupt. During the meeting, while discussing numbers and projections, a sharp pain began forming in my chest. I tried to ignore it, as I always did with anything that could get in my way. "As you can see, gentlemen, our projection for the next quarter." My voice failed. Cold sweat ran down my forehead. "Mr. Malik, are you all right?" asked Thompson, his face showing genuine concern. I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. The room began to spin, and the last thing I heard was Sarah shouting, "Someone call an ambulance." What happened next still seemed surreal. I felt my body disconnect, as if floating. The chest pain disappeared, replaced by a sense of peace I had never experienced before. That's when the light appeared. Not an ordinary light, but something transcendental. "Ibrahim," a soft voice called me. "You have forgotten who you are." "Who's there?" I asked, feeling a mixture of fear and fascination. "Someone who knows your true essence," the voice replied. "You have been seeking truth in the wrong places." At that moment, I saw something that would change my life forever. The figure that materialized before me was nothing like what I expected. Years of studying Islam hadn't prepared me for this. "But this is impossible," I stammered. "Truth is rarely what we expect it to be, Ibrahim," said the figure, with a smile that seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe. That's when I heard distant voices. "He's coming back." Pressure stabilizing. The light began to fade, but before I returned, the figure left one last message. "Remember, Ibrahim, the truth of Islam is greater than you imagine. And when you're ready, I will be waiting." I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, with Amira holding my hand. "Alhamdulillah, you scared us so much, Habibi." But I could barely hear her. My mind was fixed on the experience I had, on the figure I met, and on the truth that was beginning to unfold before me. The successful businessman who entered that conference room was no longer the same man. My journey was just beginning, and I had no idea of the price I would have to pay for this truth. The smell of hospital antiseptic constantly reminded me that I had returned to the world of the living. 3 weeks had passed since my near-death experience, but the words of that mysterious figure echoed in my mind like an incessant mantra. Truth is broader than we think. "Ibrahim, the doctor said you can be discharged tomorrow," Amira commented, adjusting my pillow. Her brown eyes studied me with concern. "But you seem so distant. Are you in pain?" "No, Habibi. The pain isn't physical," I replied, trying to find words to explain the turmoil in my mind. On the first Friday after my discharge, I decided to visit the mosque. Imam Abdullah, who had known me for 2 decades, immediately noticed my restlessness during prayer. "My son," he called me after the sermon, "something disturbs your heart. I can see it in your eyes." We sat in his office, where the aroma of Arabic coffee filled the air. I took a deep breath before speaking. "Imam, during my near-death experience, I saw something that defies everything I've always believed." "What do you mean, Ibrahim?" "The figure I met, it showed me a truth about our faith that," I hesitated, "that contradicts much of what we've always preached here." Imam Abdullah adjusted his taqiyya, visibly uncomfortable. "Ibrahim, sometimes shaitan can confuse us with visions." "No," I interrupted, more abruptly than I intended. Forgive me, Imam, but this was different. It was pure, it was divine. I returned home that day more disturbed than before. At night, Amira found me in the study, surrounded by books on theology and accounts of near-death experiences. "It's 3 in the morning, Habibi," she said softly. "You need to rest." "How can I rest, Amira? Everything we believed. What if there's more? What if we're limiting Allah to our own limited understanding?" She sat beside me, taking my hands in hers. "Ibrahim, you're scaring me. Since you came back from the hospital, you seem like a different person." "Maybe I am," I murmured. The person I was died in that conference room. The following days were a whirlwind. At the company, my partners noticed my distraction during meetings. At the mosque, the whispers began. "Did you hear about Ibrahim? They say he's questioning the teachings." I heard he had a heretical vision. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call. "Mr. Malik, this is Dr. Sarah Bennett from the Center for Near-Death Experience Studies. I heard about your case and would like to talk." "How did you know?" "Let's say you're not the only one who had a transformative experience. There's a group of people who meet weekly to discuss their experiences. People like you, who have seen beyond the veil." That night, lying beside Amira, who was sleeping deeply, I realized I was at a crossroads. Follow the safe and familiar path, or dive into the unknown in search of the truth that was shown to me. "Allah," I whispered in the darkness, "if this is a test, I don't know if I have the strength to pass. But if it's a mission, give me courage to move forward." My phone vibrated with a message from Dr. Bennett. "The meeting is tomorrow at 7 p.m. Come discover that you're not alone on this journey." I looked at Amira one more time, knowing that every step I took from here on could cost me everything I had built. But truth, once glimpsed, cannot be ignored. The address sent by Dr. Bennett led me to a discreet building in downtown Chicago. As I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, my heart was racing, a mixture of anxiety and hope. The room was arranged in a circle with about 12 people from different backgrounds. A middle-aged woman wearing a crucifix was chatting animatedly with a man who appeared to be Buddhist. In the corner, an elderly rabbi was leafing through a book. "Ibrahim, welcome." Dr. Bennett greeted me warmly. "Please join us, brothers and sisters," she began. "Today we have a new member." Ibrahim had his experience a few weeks ago. A gray-haired woman, who introduced herself as Martha, leaned toward me. "How was your experience, dear?" I hesitated for a moment, but something about that group gave me confidence. I saw something that challenged everything I believed about my faith. The figure I met showed me that truth is broader. "Ah," sighed Rabbi David. "The greater truth." I saw it too. It cost me my position at the Orthodox synagogue, but I gained something much more precious. "What did you gain?" I asked, intrigued. "Liberation," he answered simply. In the following weeks, I dove deeply into books and discussions. One day, during a private session with Dr. Bennett, I shared my deepest concerns. "Sarah," I began, using her first name as she had insisted, "how do you deal with the conflict between what you saw and what your religion teaches?" She smiled compassionately. "Ibrahim, have you considered that perhaps there isn't a real conflict? That maybe our religions are just different windows to the same light? But the Quran, what do you think the Quran is really trying to teach us? The words or the essence?" Before I could answer, she suggested something unexpected. "There's a spiritual retreat next weekend. 3 days of silence, meditation, and contemplation. It would be an opportunity to deepen your search." At the retreat, I met James, a former Methodist pastor who had a similar experience. During my NDE, he shared during a walk, "I realize we spend so much time defending our religious fences that we forget about the garden they're supposed to protect." On the second night of the retreat, during deep meditation, I had another vision. The same figure from my NDE appeared, but this time with a different message. "Ibrahim, you're on the right path. The spiritual healing you seek isn't in abandoning your faith, but in expanding it." "But how can I expand something that seems so rigid?" I asked. "The stars appear fixed in the sky, but they're actually in constant motion. So it is with divine truth." When I returned home, Amira noticed a change in me. "Your eyes, they're different," she observed during dinner. "More serene." I found people who understand Amira, people who have seen beyond the veil like me. And did that help you? It helped me understand that I'm not losing my faith. I'm discovering its true depth. That night, for the first time since my NDE, I performed my prayers with renewed peace. The path ahead was still uncertain, but now I had a community that understood me and a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to have faith. Allah, I whispered after prayer, now I understand that you are greater than any definition we can create. The buzz in the mosque grew each week. My absence from Friday prayers didn't go unnoticed, and my participation in the interfaith study group became the subject of whispered conversations after prayers. Ibrahim, Kareem, an old friend and mosque council member, called to me after seeing me talking to a group of young people about spiritual experiences. Imam Abdullah asked to speak with you. Now, the Imam's office was different from what I remembered, or perhaps I was the one who was different. 3 other community leaders were present, their grave faces observing me. Ibrahim, my son, Imam Abdullah began, his voice mixing concern and authority. We have been receiving troubling reports about your recent activities. What kind of reports, Imam? You've been attending non-Islamic groups, sharing ideas that contradict our teachings, intervened Rashid, one of the most conservative council members. Some say you're questioning the fundamentals of our faith. I took a deep breath before responding. I'm not questioning faith. I'm expanding my understanding of it. Expanding? Rashid laughed humorlessly. You're confusing our youth with heretical ideas. By Allah, Ibrahim, Imam Abdullah leaned forward. What happened to you? You were one of our most respected members. I'm still Muslim, Imam, but my near-death experience showed me that Allah is greater than our limited interpretations. The silence that followed was deafening. The following week, the impacts began to show. My company lost 3 major Muslim clients. At the halal supermarket, where I had shopped for years, the owner refused to serve me. Dad, my 16-year-old daughter Sophia approached me one night. My friends at school, their mothers don't want them talking to me. They say our family has strayed. That hurt more than anything else. Amira, who until then had tried to remain neutral, finally exploded. You're destroying our family. Ibrahim, why can't you just keep your doubts to yourself? Because truth cannot be silenced, Habibi. Don't you see? We're all trapped in boxes we build ourselves. And what's the price of this truth of yours? She asked, tears in her eyes. Our community? Our reputation? Our family? That night, I received an unexpected call from Hassan, one of the businessmen who had canceled contracts with my company. Ibrahim, I need to tell you something. In private, we met at a cafe far from the community. Hassan seemed nervous. 20 years ago, he began, his voice trembling, I had an experience similar to yours. But I chose to stay silent. I chose safety instead of truth. And that decision haunts me every day. Why are you telling me this now? Because you had the courage I didn't have. And maybe it's time for more people to speak up. I returned home that night with renewed certainty. The price of truth was high, but the cost of silence would be even greater. In my office, I began writing an article about my experience, knowing that its publication would be the point of no return. May Allah give me strength, I murmured while typing the title, Beyond the Walls of Faith, A Journey of Spiritual Discovery. The Chicago Conference Center auditorium was packed. Hundreds of people, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and people without religious affiliation, waited for the start of the lecture, Near-Death Experiences and Spiritual Transformation. Backstage, I adjusted my microphone, feeling the weight of the moment. Dr. Bennett gently squeezed my shoulder. Ready, Ibrahim? No, I smiled nervously. But when are we ever really ready to change lives? As I stepped onto the stage, I saw familiar faces in the front row. Amira was there, our first public appearance together in weeks. Beside her, Sophia smiled encouragingly. But what surprised me was seeing Imam Abdullah sitting discreetly at the back of the auditorium. Assalamu alaikum, I began. My name is Ibrahim Malik, and 6 months ago, I died for 7 minutes. The silence was palpable as I shared my journey. I spoke about the light, about the mysterious figure, about universal truths that transcended specific religions. The figure I met didn't ask me to abandon my faith, I explained. Instead, it showed me that our religious differences are like different languages describing the same divine love. During the Q&A session, a young Muslim woman stood up, tears in her eyes. How do you deal with the fear of betraying your faith? I'm not betraying my faith, I responded softly. I'm honoring its deepest essence. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught us about compassion and unity. How can we truly follow these teachings if we isolate ourselves in our own truths? After the lecture, while greeting people, a familiar voice called out, Ibrahim. It was Imam Abdullah. I came prepared to confront heresy, he said, his voice slightly trembling. But what I heard was the voice of true submission to Allah. Imam, No, he raised his hand. Let me finish. 40 years ago, I had a similar experience, but I chose to bury it, fearing the consequences. Today, you freed me from that secret. At that moment, Hassan approached, followed by 3 other mosque members. We're not alone, Ibrahim, said Hassan. There are more of us than we imagined. Dr. Bennett, who was watching the scene, smiled. This is how change happens. One brave truth inspires others to emerge. Amiro approached, intertwining her fingers with mine. Now I understand, Habibi. You weren't losing your faith. You were showing us how it could be greater. That night, while driving home with my family, I reflected on the journey. The figure from my NDE had said that truth was broader than we thought, but only now did I fully understand. The true revelation wasn't just in the near-death experience, but in how it connected us to each other. Dad, Sophia broke the silence. Do you think Allah planned all this? I smiled, remembering the mysterious figure's words. Allah doesn't just plan our paths, dear. He plans our encounters, our doubts, and even our transformations. Every question is a prayer, and every sincere search is a form of worship. My phone vibrated with a message from Imam Abdullah. Tomorrow, after morning prayer, we need to talk about creating a space in the mosque for interfaith dialogue. Truth had cost much, but it brought an even greater gift. The freedom to be authentically faithful, not just to one religion, but to the vastness of divine love that transcends all boundaries.